conversation about this year's elections. Let's get that just a little bit there. There you go. Welcome back. So what are we talking about? Well, you knew this was coming, the so-called axis of evil. I'm talking about, of course, Julius Malema and the EFF teaming up with a number of other political parties. You knew this coming. I predicted it previously that this would be a result of the EFF trying to find its way into power. But it's really just a pipe dream. This is a silly pipe dream that's simply not going to happen. The EFF cannot possibly get to two-thirds that Julius Malema and Jacob Zuma want to get for their party. So today, the obvious was announced, and that obvious was that EFF leader Julius Malema has revealed that his party is willing to work with newly formed Mkhonto we Sizwe party and other like-minded political parties after the May general elections. Now, he spoke to South African Broadcasting Corporation this morning, and Malema said the EFF was willing to partner with the Pan-African Congress, the African Transformation Movement, and the MK party to achieve a two-thirds majority that will enable it to deliver on promises that it's made in its election manifesto. Now, this is pure fantasy, but before we get any further, let's be clear. The EFF, just over 10% of the 2019 national elections. The ATM at 0.44%, if I recall correctly. We'll cover that later. And the Pan-African Congress at 0.19%. So between the two of them, they barely got 100,000 votes. The EFF got 1.8 million. That takes them to 1.9 million. Now, those figures are important, but they don't necessarily predict the outcome of 2024. And I'll explain why as we go on here. So this is what Malema had to say. He said the Pan-African Congress is there. What we've been preaching, that they've been preaching from the time of Robert Sobukwe. The ATM preaches the same gospel, and many other formations that are there are willing to say we need to put our differences aside and look at what it is in the best interest of the African child. And that is to listen to the type of language that we're going to listen to. What? The type of language we're going to listen to. Malema went on to say the MK party now, which has come onto the playing field, also indicates that the expropriation of land without compensation is fundamental. And that is the kind of language we're listening to. And the ANC, by the way, which elected Ramaphosa in 2017, took a resolution to expropriate land without compensation. Now, of course, what we have to remember here, ladies and gentlemen, is that, what is this? Merging. Is that when we talk about the ANC and MK, we talk about MK, Jacob Zuma was opposed to expropriation without compensation. Has he suddenly changed his tune after all these years of saying that he wouldn't support such a policy? So is that what's going on? Well, this is political opportunism at its grandest. People saying what they think voters want to hear to get them to the polls, to pull the lever for their party, and they'll never follow through on it. There'll be no expropriation without compensation in South Africa. It will mean civil war and a collapse of the country. It's just not going to happen. The existing mechanism, expropriation with compensation, is more than enough to address any lingering land concerns, most of which were long ago addressed 15, 18 years ago, and settlements were made to almost every legitimate land claim that's ever been made in South Africa. So, on Sunday, Jacob Zuma gave a strong indication the MK party would also partner with the EFF to get a two-thirds majority. In a birthday message to Julius Malema, who just had his 43rd birthday, Zuma said, whether they like it or not, we must win a two-thirds majority. And you'll be saying, when I got to this level, I was 43. That's a good age. Enjoy, do whatever you want, but be ready that we must have our two-thirds as a black majority in this country, and then we'll sort out the other things after. Wow, bit of racism there. So Jacob Zuma is wanting to get in government for black South Africans exclusively, not for Indians, coloreds, whites, just for blacks. That's a stark contrast to how Jacob Zuma governed when he was president. He was claiming to be president for all South Africans. In fact, went to great lengths to meet with Afrikaner groups, poor Afrikaners, and also dismissed land expropriation repeatedly as president. But ever the opportunist, the octogenarian Jacob Zuma is now simply looking at a chance to take on the wounded beast that is the ANC. Now, Malema continued with some comical comments, which he usually does. The unseen, the unknown, and he blames it on one political party. And is it anti-Semitism because they're Jewish? I don't know. It's certainly anti-white. It's certainly anti-establishment. Malema said he's aware that not all political parties will work with the EFF. Of course they won't. But the reason he says they won't work with the EFF is the following. It is because of the Oppenheimers. The Oppenheimers. The Oppenheimers have that much interest and control over South Africa. They do not. When you talk land, you are a direct threat to the Oppenheimer family. How so? How so? The Oppenheimer family is billionaires through diamonds and they've done it abroad. The diamonds are gone in South Africa. There are very few diamonds being mined. So how are you a threat when you talk land to the Oppenheimers? This is what you tell low information, poorly educated folks. So those who are saying that the EFF is enemy number one and they cannot work with the EFF, go and look at their financials and who gave them millions just in the previous term. And you will realize that these are the parties that are financed by the Oppenheimers. Now, I think the only party that you can actually make that legitimate claim, Julius, is actually the Democratic Alliance, which received a single donation of 15 million rand, I believe, from one of the family members. I believe is an Oppenheimer. I could be wrong. But that's it. So how about we look at the EFF's financials, which they failed to disclose by claiming that no one gave the amount that requires financial reporting, and that's just total nonsense. How does Juju drive around and live in the lap of luxury with multiple homes, Breitling watches, jetting off to wherever he wants, like Cuban places on a whim? Who's paying for that? So now Malema claimed that the family, the Oppenheimers, financed all the parties that are anti-expropriation of land without compensation. We work with the ANC now on this motion, and they chickened out at the last minute when they said we can't expropriate rotten land without compensation. What are we going to do with rotten land? What are you going to do with any land? You have no plans for it. The ANC's plan is to turn 1 million black South Africans into subsistence farmers when the rest of the world has gone completely the opposite direction with mechanization. It's absolutely ridiculous. And I've got a toddler across the street rolling around on pavement now, if that noise is picking up here. Now, the MK party, which was expressing concern that they would not get the 15,000 signatures necessary to appear on this ballot in time for the deadline, now says that they've met the deadline. So they met the 15% signature requirement threshold. So that means they're likely to be on the ballot for this election. However, the problem here, of course, is that the African National Congress is going to great lengths to ensure that they're not on the ballot. Now, MK spokesperson Nlamulo Ndela said, "We are doing well in securing the signatures we need to believe, and that will meet the IEC deadline, and we're busy finalizing the candidate list." Now, in responding to Malema's comments, he said, "Remember, we have been in discussion with multiple like-minded progressive political parties with the aim of forming a united front. We have had discussions with EFF as well, but there's a difference between discussions and negotiations." So all is not well. Now, let's reflect back on the 2019 national elections because they're germane in 2024. People want to talk about 2021 municipal elections, and that has an impact, but so do the 2019 national elections. That's the last time South Africans went to the poll to vote for national leadership. In that election, the EFF achieved 10.8% of those who bothered to go to vote. That was 1.8 million votes. Now, the African Transformation Movement, a relatively new party at that time, formed just a year prior, had 0.44% of the vote. That's 76,830 votes nationwide. The Pan-African Congress, an organization that made a play for politics for a long time, basically a communist, socialist-oriented group that's all about chasing whitey out and expropriating land and nationalizing things. The Pan-African Congress has been around. They were contributors to the liberation movement, probably arguably played a bigger role than the ANC did. The ANC claims otherwise. But the Pan-African Congress, that's a name that just doesn't resonate with South Africans. Pan-Africa. South Africa is very xenophobic. Not all South Africans, but as a country, it's a very xenophobic country, anti-foreigner, especially anti-African foreigner. So Pan-African Congress is not a title for a political party that's ever actually resonated very well with South Africans in the post-94 dispensation. In 2019, that party got 32,677 votes. So if you add them together, that's 109,000 votes for the ATM and the PAC. Yeah, these are just token parties. Now, much has changed, however, since 2019. Load shedding, unemployment, economic collapse, and Jacob Zuma is back in from the cold. And his MK party is terrifying the African National Congress in recent by-elections. In KwaZulu-Natal, they secured 21% in their first by-election. Their second by-election, they got 28%. And then in a by-election in Mpumalanga, they shocked the ANC by getting 28% there as well. But some things do remain the same, folks. Malema, his calls to racism and race hustling, expropriation, nationalization, however, are not winning his party sufficient support. The main reason the EFF is getting attention these days is in large measure owing to the African National Congress's woes. Additionally, whenever or wherever the EFF have entered into a coalition, they cause chaos and eventually the collapse of local government. In other words, the EFF have accomplished nothing in their decade plus of existence. They've promised to build schools. They failed to build a single school. They promised to deliver here. They failed to do it. When actually in position to take over a mayoralship in the Free State, because they had the plurality and the ANC aligned with them, they told their mayor candidate to refuse the seat and left it for a coalition to form. They don't want to govern. They want to steal. They want to rapage. They want to pillage. They want to divide South Africans for their personal benefit. That's what the leadership of the EFF is all about. There may be true devotees of the party who think that it's appropriate to steal other people's property and give it to people based on their skin pigmentation, but those are just a handful of South Africans. Still, 2024 is a wild card election for sure. Will disenchantment mean demise for the African National Congress? In the Northern Cape, Eastern Cape, and Mpumalanga and Northwest, that is very unlikely. They'll continue to secure the majority of the vote in those provinces. In those provinces, the ANC's Bantu education outcomes have ensured loyalty, as a few million black South Africans will vote against their best interests and mark ANC on their ballots. And what of this axis of evil? Question mark. Well, in some polls, the EFF is currently polling at 19%. And if that's true, it's a shocking and worrying figure. 20% of the electorate actually voting for a party that promotes racism and murder of minorities, and also attacks businesses with petrol bombs and tears down street signs, claiming to be a party trying to govern. However, nationally, they're more likely to come in between 12 and 15% of the vote. The African Transformation Movement, the Pan-African Congress, will not register 0.5% of the vote, making them symbolic partners for this axis of evil at best. Now, the wild card here is MK. In the by-elections, it's doing quite well, but the ANC is pulling out all the stops to keep MK off the ballot on May 29th. If they're on the ballot, MK will eviscerate the ANC in KwaZulu-Natal and in Gauteng provinces. Its impact will be markedly less elsewhere throughout the country. Now, what are the prospects of the opposition multi-party charter? Remember, I was at the launch of the multi-party charter at Emperor's Palace last year, and I covered it, interviewed the leaders of all the political parties present, Herman Mashaba, John Steenhuisen, Neil De Beer, Belenkosi Rabisa, all these members of these parties. So what are their prospects? Well, they are going to get somewhere between 30 and 40% best case. So they're not going to have a sufficient number to govern. They're going to need a partner if they want to work together. Now, the nightmare scenario here is a wounded ANC teaming up with this axis of evil to govern South Africa into total collapse. But the axis of evil getting 2/3 of the electorate to vote for them on May 29th, that's a pure pipe dream. You see, folks, when people zoll, they roll the paper. And when people zoll, they share that zoll. And that's what Jacob Zuma and Julius Malema are doing. They're zolling. They're living in a fantasy world. This coalition will not get 2/3 of the electorate to vote for them on May 29th. EFF, 12-15%. MK, hard to predict. Let's take a swag when we figure the population of KwaZulu-Natal and Gauteng, the two most populous provinces in South Africa, and that there it's likely that it's very possible, especially in KZN, that the MK party will get 25 to 30% of the vote. So that will get them a couple million votes, which would be amazing. So they could get 10 to 20% of the electorate if things go very well. But the party has no charter. It has no headquarters. It has no disclosed financing. It has no party structure. None. Absolute nonsense. And it's simply pandering to racist interest, talking about expropriation and nationalization, which is the same thing EFF wants. So it's in stark contrast to Jacob Zuma when he was president. And he talked about working with everybody, going out to small, poor Afrikaner encampments and homeless villages, things like that, shanty towns, and trying to reach all South Africans. Of course, he was doing that while out the back door, money was being pilfered and stolen left and right by his ANC cadre, cadres all over the country, and elected politicians. So what's going to happen in 2024 for South Africa, folks? What's really going to happen in this election? Well, the ANC will not get 50%. I predicted that in November of 2021, and I'm sticking to that prediction. At that time, before the massive load shedding and the economic collapse, the joblessness, the 82 murders per day, up from just 50 murders per day a few years ago, before all of that became something that South Africans have to live with each and every day now, I predicted that, what is this? Comment. What is somebody's comment there? Builder ran out of cockstones in places. That building ran out of anything. That's the end of the building, man. That's the end of the building. I don't know what you're talking about there. Anyway, it's a little bit of a distraction here, not germane to the topic at hand. I made that prediction of 38 to 42% best case for the ANC in 2024. That was November 2021. I'm sticking that prediction. It could be wrong. It was based on the information available then and my projections of what was going to happen. I predicted load shedding would become commonplace, also that unemployment would continue to rise, and that the economy would sink, all of which has come true. And those things will weigh heavily. The one thing that isn't weighing on South Africans is that many South Africans go to the polls. They don't care about corruption. The UDM is making corruption a key part of its manifesto. The Freedom Front Plus released its manifesto this weekend talking about corruption, but in a broader sense. And the DA talks about corruption endlessly, but it's not bringing voters to their standard. South Africans know that the ANC is corrupt, and people will still vote for them. People know that the EFF is corrupt, and they'll still vote for them. Corruption is a way of life in Africa. It's a way of life the world over, but it's especially true in Africa. And that is not going to win you an election in South Africa. Yes, it's good to point out the corruption. It's important to note that the former defense minister, Speaker of Parliament, was accused of corruption. It's important to note that Zweli Mkhize is accused of digital vibes, and Ace Magashule, and Paul Mashatile, and Cyril Ramaphosa, Pala, and Zandile Gumeda, and the list goes on and on and on and on of supposed or actually corrupt ANC officials. Good to note that. But it's more important to show pictures of sewage in the streets of Port Elizabeth under ANC rule. It's more important to show reports of 16 children and toddlers starving to death because the ANC returned 63 million rands back to the national government because their inept, corrupt administration in Port Elizabeth couldn't feed those children because they're idiots. It's more important to show pictures of closed tourist operators, of hotels, of iconic restaurants that are out of business. It's more important to show shanty towns 30 years after the ANC took over. These are the visuals. These are the comments that will win voters to your standard, regardless of who you are. Regardless of who you are. You must tell people things that resonate with them. Insecurity, not safe to go to school, not safe to go out on the street, not safe to be in your home. You could be a victim of murder. Political assassinations, no electricity, spoiled food, no lights, security gates that won't open, cameras that don't work, roads that are falling apart, or potholes with roads alongside them. These are the things that South Africans will listen to. These are the things that South Africans will resonate with. These are the things that voters must hear from your political party, whether you're the ACDP, the Freedom Front Plus, the Democratic Alliance, the Inkatha Freedom Party, or a host of other parties. If you want to win, that's how you win. The EFF and MK will bring people to their standard, but the EFF has reached a plateau. Unless some miracle happens for them, their language of racism and race hustling and expropriation and legal theft is not winning enough people to their standard. Jacob Zuma will get voters, but let's be honest here, folks. These are all bum-hurt parts of the African National Congress. First was COPE, disappeared. COPE went away, the Congress of the People. These were all bum-hurt Thabo Mbeki supporters who were angry that he was ousted as president. Next, the EFF, bum-hurt African National Congress Youth League. And remember this, as we see Jacob Zuma and Julius Malema drinking tea together and being chummy. Jacob Zuma had Julius Malema evicted from the African National Congress because of his comments about the president. And Malema became famous because of his opposition to Zuma. So if you're an EFF member and you join because you're angry at Zuma, but now Malema's chumming up to him and talking about an alliance and giving him power again, what exactly are you upset about? What exactly are you supporting? Malema is bum-hurt, and all his EFF supporters are bum-hurt ANC former members. COPE, former ANC. MK, former ANC. These are all people who did not get positions of power or were removed for their conduct, Malema, their criminality, Zuma, from the ANC. Now, he's technically still part of it. But the reality here, ladies and gentlemen, is that Julius Malema can talk about forming an alliance with the African Transformation Movement, 0.44% of the vote in 2019, 76,000 votes. Good luck with that. And with Pan-African Congress, 0.19% of the vote in 2019, 32,000 votes. Together, 109,000 votes to go with the EFF's 1.8 million. That'll give you 1.9 million. And you can lie. And let's just say that things go incredibly well for MK and the ANC doesn't get them removed from the ballot, which they're trying desperately. They stay on the ballot and they get 10 to 20% of the electorate. I think it's closer to 10% as best case. But 10%, add that to the EFF's 15 will give them an optimistic outlook. That's 25, 26 with those other parties. Now, the danger here, of course, is this axis of evil, as I'm calling it, because these are people who believe in legalized theft. They believe that because of your skin color, what you own is somehow illegitimate, even though you worked for it, you studied for it, you invested, you put the sweat of your brow out there. They believe that because of your skin color, what you own and what you've achieved is illegitimate. Of course, that's nonsense. That's simply racism. And that's exactly what it is. But these people believe that. They believe it's appropriate to nationalize resources like land and mines for the benefit of all, which is nonsense because it's not for the benefit of all. Nationalized mining and oil has never worked out to the benefit of everyone. Just ask the Saudis. Just ask the Nigerians. That's an even better example. Nigeria's made hundreds of billions of dollars off of oil over the past 50 years. What do they have to show for it? What do they have to show for it? Very little, to say the least. The bottom line here, folks, is that that alliance at best could best case get 26%. If they get 26%, they'll be getting it because they're eating away at the ANC, which will take the ANC down lower even than my prediction, potentially. Can you imagine that? If somehow the EFF gets 2 million and the MK party gets 1 million, which is possible, that's 3 million votes. That's 30%. If they get that. But I'm not convinced that's going to happen. We'll have to see. It's a wild card. 2024 is coming up, and that's the bottom line here, folks. That's the bottom line. But here's the problem in South Africa. Black South Africans, colored South Africans, Indian South Africans, white South Africans who've given up on the political process, who say it doesn't matter who I vote for. You're part of the problem. It's the same in America. You're a part of the problem. You must get out and vote. If you can complain all you want, but you think a protest non-vote is actually going to help anything? Get out and vote. Make sure you register to vote. And the same thing here in America. Stop moaning about things. Stop complaining about how corrupt the system is when you do nothing to fix it. You take no action to contribute to the system. That's your responsibility as a voter. That's your responsibility as a citizen. Voting is the most important civic responsibility, whether you live in South Africa or you live in the United States or you live somewhere else in the world. If you have a country that actually holds votes, despite corrupt political parties, it's your responsibility to go vote. So, the axis of evil, is it? Well, you decide. But certainly, the effort by Julius Malema and Jacob Zuma to team up, and Jacob Zuma to abandon all his previous positions in support of all ethnicities, all racial groups, and toss aside expropriation without compensation, now has flipped the script, and now he's looking to actually do that, according to his most recent statements. It's pretty scary when you see these people whose focus in politics is based simply on skin pigmentation. Skin pigmentation is that. Skin pigmentation. It does not mean who you are. It does not form the content of your character, and it does not account for your actions. Who you are determines the content of your character. Who you are and what decisions you make determine your outcomes, not your skin color, not your faith. Well, your faith can influence it, but it doesn't determine it. It's ultimately up to you what decisions you make, regardless of your faith. That's the bottom line here. Now, the hate wankers and the racists will probably latch onto this video and go, oh, look at this racist calling these black parties axis of evil. It's not because they're black. It's because their policies are evil. When you think it's appropriate to steal what others have earned, when you think it's appropriate to steal what others have built because they're different, that makes you evil. And that's the bottom line. And that's what EFF is all about. That's what MK claims it's all about now. That's what the PAC has always been about, and that's what the ATM is about. Stealing and taking away from others who've earned and worked based on their own efforts. And for all the idiots who have this liberal white guilt, stop it. Learn a little bit about history. The Irish were enslaved in the Caribbean by the English for 100 years. The Russians were enslaved by the Golden Horde for hundreds of years. Europeans were captured by the Barbary pirates and sent into slavery, castrated, and also sold off as harem whores for centuries. As late as the late 19th century, long after slavery had legally ended in America, with the 13th Amendment on the 6th of December, 1865, the Barbary pirates were still sailing to the shores of Ireland, the Orkneys, the Faroes, and Iceland, and taking captives as slaves. Slavery, modern slavery, continued in Mauritania until technically legally abolished less than 20 years ago. Less than 20 years ago. In Africa. Arabs in Mauritania enslaving black Wolof speakers from West Africa. And slavery continues around the world today, all over the planet. Sexual slavery, bondage in India, children forced to break apart ships. Now, evil is evil, regardless of what your skin color is, regardless of your ethnic orientation, regardless of your faith. Evil is evil, and wrong is wrong. And South Africans must go to the poll on May 29th. and pull the lever. And I encourage you, I exhort you to go do it. Vote for a political party that doesn't believe in evil. Now, you can whine and whinge all you want about the Democratic Alliance, and you've got lots of basis to do it. They're not a middle of the road. They're not a conservative party. They're a left of center political leftist socialist party. But they're not the ANC. The Freedom Front Plus and the ACTP are the only true parties that are on the right side of the spectrum. And you have to decide for yourself where you want to go and where you're voting for. That's your choice, folks. I want to thank everybody for tuning in here, and I hope that this discussion about what's going on puts things in perspective. This axis of evil that Julius Malema and Jacob Zuma are talking about now, remember this. In every single instance where the EFF has joined a coalition in Nelson Mandela Bay, in Durban, in Ekurhuleni, in Tshwane, in Joburg, in every single case where they've joined one of these coalitions, they have backed out and or caused chaos and collapse. Look at what happened at Ekurhuleni these past few days. EFF throwing chairs, throwing water, assaulting other members of the council. Absolutely ridiculous. These prison suit, pajama wearing clowns should not be in governance. They should be in shackles and removed from governance for their behavior. They're thugs, and that's who they are. And that has nothing to do with their skin color. It has everything to do with who they are. That's the bottom line, folks. That is the fact. All right, so there you have it. South Africans, go to the polls. Americans, go to the polls. 2024 is a consequential year, regardless of what you think. Get out there and vote, folks. God bless and have a good day. For those who are not familiar with the channel, you're finding us for the first time, feel free to become a subscriber and join us right here on Chris Wyatt Reports, where you get objective, honest, thoughtful, cogent, insightful, and deep analysis of events in South Africa, around the continent of Africa, and for that matter, around the world. Thank you very much. God bless. Have a good day. Hopefully some of you join us here at the top of the hour for Chris Wyatt Reports, where we'll talk a little bit about this and more about news around South Africa, across the continent of Africa, and around the world. God bless and have a great day, folks. Thank you for being here. I appreciate your time.